Quick reminder that the description has a link to a resource website that you can use to help contribute to ongoing Black Lives Matter organizations. You can do a myriad of things like donate to bail funds or sign petitions, all of which go a long way to fighting systemic racism. Thank you very much for your time. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and I've got a question. What do we call this? Okay, yes, we call it Toon Chaos, but what do we call the series? Okay, so we have the big 100 card sets, and we get 4 of those a year. Those are core sets. Then we have ones that introduce 3 new themes, and we get a ton of reprints that are related to them. Those are deck build packs. We've got the Duelists of Legend packs for the anime-inspired updates, and then we have the Legend sets, Dragons of Legend, Battles of Legend, that are all shiny and are made up of OCG imports and reprints of high-impact cards. But then we have stuff like Toon Chaos and Fist of the Gadget, 60 card sets that are mostly reprints and imports, but are headlined by 2 waves of support for fan-favorite themes. And this may be because we've only had them for a few years, but we don't have a category for them and it irks me. So until we get some kind of consensus on this, I'm calling these legacy sets, because of their focus on legacy support. But why go through all this effort? Well, it's mostly because I wanted to have a name for them when I say this. Legacy sets do not have a good track record. For instance, Valkyries are built on the admittedly crazy cool effect of Mischief of the Time Goddess, but the theme has to sacrifice so much to use it that it stood no real chance in competition. Ninjas, on the other hand, had a history. Grandmaster Hanzo was a splendid advantage engine, and Ninjutsu Art of Super Transformation was a kaiju before we even had kaijus. But, sadly, a Link monster that searched ninjutsu arts and a field spell that recycled your cards just didn't get them back in the game. And remember the hype for Fire Fist? Sure, Gadgets pretty much got the shaft, but you could not escape the wave of combo videos lauding the Blazing Battalion as the next big meta threat. But, well, they didn't make it either. Much talk was had that, because Fire Fist Dragon missed the reprint train in that set, anyone who wanted to spend the time to learn the deck ended up getting hit by a huge secondary market paywall, so no one stuck around long enough to really innovate with it. So either the momentum was gone by the time the Mystic Fighters reprint came along, or the deck really couldn't live up to its potential. Either way, the Brotherhood was forced to retire back to Liang Peak to wait for their next chance to take the field. And I can't help but feel like we're about to run into a similar situation with Toon Chaos. Admittedly, the Chaos cards are in a much better spot than previous contestants. Chaos isn't a hard and fast archetype, but Yu-Gi-Oh has a huge roster of light and dark monsters with excellent graveyard synergy, so this can actually support a huge number of themes. It's actually going to be pretty difficult for some of these cards to not make a huge splash. Toons, on the other hand... Look, I could sit here all day and talk about their disadvantages. Despite having huge attacks, they have effects that make it statistically unlikely that they'll ever OTK. A lot of them rely too heavily on a do-nothing continuous spell, and they don't really have a cohesive set of effects, but... damn it, they're Toons! I grew up on duel monsters, and seeing established monsters get toonified was one of my favorite things, so I want this deck to be good. To that end, we're going to watch reruns of all the old Toon cards, wake up early to catch the latest Saturday morning editions, then brainstorm what the next season could look like. Get your drawing tablets out, everyone, because it's time to talk Toons. But before we continue, I wanted to ask really quick if you could please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. That way you can stay up to date on new releases, and my brain makes the happy juice when good number go up. Oh, and ringing the bell is a pretty good way to stay on top of things as well. Analysis videos like this tend to do pretty well, but if you like any of my other series like the Top 10s and Dream Theme, that's a pretty good way to make sure you catch them. Thank you for your patience. Now, back to the video. Let's wind the reels back to 2002. Spell Ruler is released, and we see the very first wave of Toon monsters. Toon Mermaid, Toon Summon Skull, Manga ryu-ran, and Blue Eyes Toon Dragon. Despite the different names and stats, they all have basically the same effect. They can't be normal summoned or set, couldn't attack the turn they were summoned, you had to control Toon World to special summon them, and if Toon World blew up, so did all your Toons. If they were level 6 or higher, you'd have to tribute the same amount of monsters you'd normally have to tribute summon them, but it was a special summon, so that was nice. And you also had to pay 500 life points to declare an attack with them. Oh, and what is Toon World? Well, it's a continuous spell that costs 1,000 life points to play, and does literally nothing else on its own. The upside was that, unless your opponent controlled a Toon as well, you could attack directly with yours, and that was the big appeal. Along with weaponizing alternate artwork, being able to attack directly for 3,000, even if you had to pay a hefty chunk of life points to set it up, was an alluring prospect. But, you know, losing out to a single mystical space typhoon was a pretty big deterrent. Fast forward to 2005, and we have Dark Beginnings 2, a kind of proto-Legends set, right down to the reprints and new cards. And this included the latest wave of Toons. Now, some of them were technically reprints, but they'd been relegated to tournament packs and league promos up to this point, so this was the first time they'd actually surfaced in a proper set, and immediately you can see some changes. To help sort out these slightly different effects, I'll be referring to the original template as Wave 1, while these are Wave 2. These Toons can be normal summoned, but they can't be freely special summoned like Mermaid. You can also summon them without having Toon World on the board, but they'll still explode if you lose it at some point. You also still need Toon World to pull off your direct attacks, but you no longer have to pay 500 life points to do it. Aside from that, these really were just Toon versions of their old selves. Masked Sorcerer draws you a card if they deal battle damage, Goblin Attack Force pulls a Dante maneuver if it attacks, and Cannon Soldier can still tribute to burn. The only difference here is that they gave Gemini Elf an effect that's the inverse of Masked Sorcerer. If it deals battle damage, your opponent discards a random card. There was also some honest-to-goodness Toon support. Toon Defense let you turn attacks against your level 4 or lower Toons into direct attacks to keep them from getting run over, which seems like a really messed up deal to me. Like, to defend your Toons, you have to let your opponent do the same thing that you're trying to do to them, but they don't have to put in any of the work? That bites. There was also Toon Table of Contents, a card that was technically useful for Toons as a search card, but infinitely more notorious for its role in Exodia Turbo decks. Toon Dark Magician Girl would come out a year later as a promo card in 2006, and it worked kind of like a mix of both waves. It had the original Masha's effect like a Wave 2, but otherwise worked exactly like a Wave 1, right down to it not really doing anything for the theme, so yeah, pretty on brand. Set the clock forward another 9 years, and we're finally starting to see enough Toon cards for a proper deck to come together. The first card to mention is Toon Ancient Gear Golem, a Wave 2 Toon they kind of had to put in there because otherwise there wouldn't be any monsters to take advantage of the rest of the support. It's funny that a direct attacker can also do piercing, but I guess it's nice to have in case you don't have Toon World active. The rest of the cards are all spell and trap support, and in one way or another help to mitigate the drawbacks of your Toons. Rollback gives a Toon an extra attack during your battle phase, meaning you won't have to field as many to reach critical damage. Shadow Toon works in a similar manner, letting you burn your opponent for damage equal to the attack of one of their monsters while you control Toon World. And with the kinds of bosses that exist nowadays, that's a pretty big ukazi. Mask helps mobilize your Toons during your opponent's turn so they can swing in for surprise damage, but because it's dependent on what your opponent has on their field, it's not super reliable. Toon Briefcase is a theme-specific time-space trap hole without the life point loss and doesn't care where the monster is summoned from, but you do have to control a Toon monster to activate it. Still, I can think of worse forms of removal, especially since all Toon cards are searchable. These last three are kind of the pièce de résistance of the set. Mimicat requires you to control Toon World and a Toon monster, but once you activate it, you can take the best card in your opponent's graveyard. If it's a monster, you get to special summon it. If it's a spell or a trap, set it to your field. But you can't use this effectively going first, and in a theme where you already have to wait a turn to attack with all your monsters, you really don't want to be going second. Comic Hand is also best going second, but its effect is much more appealing. As long as you control Toon World, it's a snatch steal with upside. You don't give your opponent life points, and it even turns the monsters you take into Toons, complete with the ability to attack directly. It can even attack the turn you take it. However, one of the downsides is that this equipped spell works like a Toon, blowing up if your opponent destroys your Toon World. But I would argue that the risk is well worth it to take your opponent's Boral Sword, getting to imagine what a Toon Boral Sword dragon would look like, then swinging in directly for a ton of damage. But the last and most important addition to date is the Toon World retrain, Toon Kingdom. This powerful pop-up book field spell has you banishing the top 3 cards of your deck face down when you activate it, I assume in reference to the life point cost of the original, but while it's on the field, it counts as Toon World, your Toons can't be targeted by your opponent's card effects, and if any of them would be destroyed by anything, you can banish a card from the top of your deck face down for each one, a massive improvement over Toon Defense. So now we have a semblance of a game plan. Use cards like Toon Kingdom and Briefcase to run interference on your opponent, while you set up your Toons so you can close out the game. Not the most resilient game plan, considering your opponent can still just go after Toon Kingdom, thus cancelling all of your Toons, but it was something. We'd start to see a trickle of Toon support starting with Clash of Rebellion, with a new Toon being introduced each core set for the next 5 sets. This would also be the advent of the third wave. Toon Cyber Dragon worked like a wave 2, but didn't blow up whenever Toon World was destroyed, meaning it was a much safer investment of a monster. Dimension of Chaos introduced Toon Barrel Dragon, which was technically the first card in the theme to offer removal, but it's Barrel Dragon. Toon Buster Blader from Breakers of Shadow makes for a nice side deck pick against, I don't know, Dragon Link if it could survive long enough, but aside from that, still not doing much for Toons. However, it was with the launch of Red Eye's Toon Dragon and Shining Victories that we would see the latest evolution of Toons, Wave 4. Not only does this Toon not self-destruct when losing Toon World, it brings its own original effect to the table, helping to swarm the field by summoning another Toon from your hand once per turn, ignoring summoning conditions. And since some of these cell-shaded skirmishers could get up to 3,000 attack, that's a pretty big help in closing out games. The latest addition is Toon Dark Magician, a Wave 4 with probably the most important effect in the theme. By discarding a Toon card, in this case meaning a card with Toon in its name, not necessarily a monster of the Toon subtype, you can either special summon any Toon monster from your deck ignoring summoning conditions, in this case meaning a monster of the Toon subtype, so no Toon Alligator, or add a Toon spell or trap from your deck to your hand. This can either summon Red Eye's Toon Dragon to summon more Toons out of your hand, grab Protection going first with Toon Kingdom, or Game Enders going second like Toon Rollback. Now, these last two add consistency, but no protection. Power, but nothing to stop interaction from your opponent. And considering where power creep is nowadays, you can't get anywhere if you don't have a plan to keep your opponent off theirs. This brings us to the most recent cast of characters, and I can't think of a better place to start than with the star of the set, Toon Black Luster Soldier. They're a bit of a mixed bag. They can't be normal summoned, much like a Wave 1. They can also be special summoned by tributing, but you can tribute from the hand as well, and it's based on the level of the monsters you tribute, not the number of monsters themselves, so it's kind of like a Wave 2 where it mimics its original ritual form. Like a Wave 3, it doesn't explode if Toon World does, and while its banish effect is reminiscent of Envoy of the Beginning, technically this is the original ritual form, so this is a new effect, much like a Wave 4. So he's a little bit of everything. But in all sincerity, Toon BLS is probably the first proper card the deck has that can break boards. And no, Toon Barrel Dragon doesn't count, especially since Toon BLS can hit and banish any card. And while you can't attack the turn you activate the banish effect, well, all translations of this card that I could find don't seem to have the can't attack the turn they're summoned clause that most Toons have, and if so, that would make this the first Toon that could actually end games without having to wait a turn. I'm pretty skeptical of this, but if it's true, then boy howdy is that exciting. Next is Toon Harpy Lady, another Wave 4 Toon. If you control Toon World, you can special summon them from your hand, and if you control another Toon on resolution, you get to pop a spell or trap that your opponent controls, much akin to the effect of Harpy's Hunting Ground. Pair this with Toon Mermaid, and you have access to an easy rank 4, and that toolbox is huge. Now it's time for the spells and traps, and Toon Page Flip is a good place to start. You can activate this quick play spell if you control Toon World, and on resolution, you grab 3 different Toon monsters from your deck, your opponent randomly picks one for you to special summon, ignoring summoning conditions, and you shuffle the rest back into your deck. Now that Toon Red Eyes, Dark Magician, and BLS are all in the card pool, you have 3 legitimate threats that you can put on board, basically for free, and you can start either picking off your opponent's board or building your own. Toon Bookmark is kind of insane, and I have no idea how it got printed. When activated, you can add a Toon World, or any card that specifically lists Toon World in its card text, from your deck to your hand. This basically means it's a Toon table of contents with a hard once per turn, but in practice, you'll usually be searching Toon Kingdom. Why? Well, because if a Toon World you control would be destroyed, you can banish Bookmark from your grave instead. Which I guess is the Bookmark holding your place? That's cute. And yeah, the big decks nowadays aren't really destroying things. Eldritch will send, Risen Dragite will bounce, but thankfully, we do have a little something extra to help out with that. Toon Terror is an honest-to-goodness Omni-Negate for the theme. which you can activate as long as you control a Toon world and at least one Toon monster. Searchable by Toon Table of Contents, Toon Bookmark, and Toon Dark Magician, you now have a catch-all response to just about anything threatening your board presence. And if it can be paired with other generic counter traps like Solemn Judgment, you have a pretty good shot at surviving the turn with lethal damage ready to go. But that's just one out-of-theme card that can help. What else can we use? Plot of Extravagance is an easy include. The theme has a lot of power without really having to rely on the extra deck, and the broad search effects the theme has won't conflict with it. Here's hoping that the pull rates for the reprint are reasonable. There Can Be Only One makes for a pretty fun floodgate. It keeps multiple zombies and rocks off the board, while you get to keep playing with your dragon, spellcaster, warrior, and winged beasts. You also might be able to get away with summon limit because of Toon Page Flip. Now, this idea sounds pretty gimmicky, even by Toon standards, but hear me out. Sky Striker had a lot of success by using Mystic Mine and swinging directly with Hayate turn after turn. What if we were able to pull off something similar with Toons? If you know you're going second, just side in the mines in original Toon World, then just swing directly over and over for game. And that's about all we have for Toons. The strategy hasn't changed much, but they've gotten a lot better at handling their opponent in Toon Chaos. I'm excited to see if anyone is able to break the rogue barrier on this deck and see it go toe-to-toe with bigger themes. Especially with the absolutely milquetoast ban list that just dropped. But now, I want to hear what you all think. Do Toons have the tools to topple shiny rocks and gaudy golden grandstanders? Or are they not getting renewed for a new season? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed, please make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.